Welcome to the lesson where we focus on the functions of the hormones secreted by the endocrine glands. Let's begin by discussing the roles of the hormones of the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland is responsible for the secretion of 5 important hormones, namely the GH, which is the growth hormone, TSH, which is the thyroid stimulating hormone, FSH, which is the follicle stimulating hormone, LH, the luteinizing hormone, as well as prolactin. Let's start with the growth hormone. Now, the growth hormone targets most organs in our body, right? It has a particularly strong effect on the growth of certain areas like our liver, our muscles, our bone, as well as cartilage. So in a nutshell, the growth hormone is involved in stimulating the growth of the whole body. So we will state here that our growth hormone is responsible for controlling the growth of our skeleton as well as our muscles. It does this by stimulating the synthesis of proteins, meaning it stimulates the making of proteins in the body. And when this happens, it leads to the growing of the skeleton as well as the muscles. Now, many growth disorders are caused by the abnormal secretion of the growth hormone. Sometimes the growth hormone can be over-secreted in the body, or it can be under-secreted. Now, we must remember that the effects of too much or too little growth hormone on the body all depends on whether this condition happens in children or in adults. My pictures below shows the effects of too little and too much growth hormone on the human body in both adults and in children. Now, children, what do you think happens if the growth hormone is under-secreted in the body? Well, the under-secretion of the growth hormone in children leads to a condition called dwarfism, right? In this case, the body is very short, with the body parts remaining in proportion. The mental ability of the person is normal, but the person does not reach sexual maturity. But we must remember that in some cases, dwarfism is in fact a genetic condition, right? In these cases, the body parts are out of proportion. For example, the person might have a normal-sized head and a torso or body with short arms and legs. On the other hand, the over-secretion of the growth hormone in children causes a condition called gigantism. Look at this boy. He is just 12 years old, but look at how tall he is. Look at his size as compared to a normal 12-year-old. Over-secretion in adults leads to a condition called acromegaly. In a person with this condition, you will find that the long bones in the body have completed growth and cannot lengthen anymore. Now, the bones of the face, especially the jawbone, can you see this? Right? And the hands and the feet increase in size. Now, let's move on to TSH, right? The thyroid stimulating hormone. What is the role of the TSH? The TSH is responsible for stimulating the thyroid gland. Why? So that the thyroid gland can start making more thyroxin. Why should the thyroid gland do that? So that it increases the level of the thyroxin in the blood. In that way, we find that the level of the TSH in the blood increases whenever the level of thyroxin drops. Children, this is very important because this process helps to keep the thyroxin level constant. But then something else can also happen. The level of TSH can actually drop. When does that happen? It can drop if the level of thyroxin in the blood increases too much. Now again, this helps to keep the level of the thyroxin constant. So what is the function of the TSH? The TSH stimulates the thyroid to secrete the hormone thyroxin. Let's move on to the FSH, which is the follicle stimulating hormone. Now the FSH, LH and prolactin all play a role in the female reproductive system. Now if we start with FSH, the follicle stimulating hormone, as its name suggests, follicle stimulating hormone, what does it do? Yes, the FSH stimulates the development of follicles, actually of primary follicles, where in the female ovary into mature Croftian follicles, right? And in males, it also activates the germinal epithelium that produces sperm cells in the testes. Let's move on to the luteinizing hormone. Now learners, in a female, what does the LH do? Very good. The LH stimulates a very important process called ovulation, which involves the release of the secondary oocyte, as well as the development of the corpus luteum in the ovary. Well, in males, it also plays a role because it stimulates the cells of Leydig that are in the testes. Why? So that the testes can start producing the male hormone testosterone. Moving on to prolactin. What prolactin does is that it stimulates the mammary glands to produce milk. When does this happen? After the birth of a baby. Let's move on to the next important gland that's busy secreting another important hormone. Now the hypothalamus of the brain is busy secreting a hormone called ADH, which is the antidiuretic hormone. Now the ADH has a very important job to do, children. It plays a very important role in helping to conserve water in the body. How does this work? Now, when there is too little water in the body and the blood becomes very, very concentrated than normal, what's going to be released? Very good. Then the ADH will be released. What will the ADH do? The ADH, children, will make the collecting duct of the kidney tubule more permeable. Why? So that more water can be drawn back into the blood from the kidney filtrate. The result would be that the amount of water in the blood will return back to normal and the urine also becomes more concentrated. So that is how the ADH helps to conserve water in the body. Now let's take a look at what happens when ADH is over-secreted in the body. Right? Now children, remember, listen carefully. Over-secretion of ADH, right, means that there's a high concentration of ADH now in the blood. What's going to happen? It can cause blood vessels to start constricting, meaning the blood vessels become narrower, and this leads to an increase in the person's blood pressure. What happens if ADH is under-secreted? Well, that would mean that there will be very low levels of ADH now in the blood. What can happen? It's going to cause the kidneys to excrete too much, large amounts of water. Then you will find that the amount of urine is going to increase. This would lead to dehydration and a drop in the person's blood pressure. The condition is known as diabetes insipidus, right? And in a person suffering from diabetes insipidus, we will expect increased amounts of thirst, right? The person is always thirsty, and an increase in the person's urine production, right? They will produce large amounts of diluted urine, and because of this water loss now, you'll find that the person is always going to be thirsty. Moving on to our thyroid gland located on either side of the trachea. The thyroid gland is responsible for the secretion of the hormone thyroxin. Now, the element iodine is very important, children, for the production of thyroxin, right? Because if there's a shortage of iodine, it can cause an enlargement of the thyroid gland. And that condition is known as a simple goiter, and we're going to speak about it in a few minutes. Now, children, thyroxin is very important because it affects every cell of our body except the cells in the brain as well as parts of the reproductive system. But everything else it affects. Its function is to stimulate enzymes that are used in our respiration. By the thyroxin stimulating the enzymes used in our respiration, what can it do? It can raise the respiration rate and release energy more quickly. So when there's more energy, it increases the working rate of our cells, which is called the metabolic rate. And this affects everything in the body. So let's look at the most important functions of thyroxin. Thyroxin is very important in controlling the body temperature. Why? Because a raised metabolic rate increases the amount of heat produced by our cells. It also plays a role in controlling blood pressure because a raised metabolic rate in the heart and the blood vessel affects blood pressure. Thyroxin is also important in controlling the normal development of the skeleton, the nerves, the reproductive organs. Why? Because the raised metabolic rate increases the rate at which the cells are also becoming mature. Now, let's look at the effects over-secretion and under-secretion of thyroxin will have on the body. Over-secretion of thyroxin is known as hyperthyroidism. Under-secretion of thyroxin is known as hypothyroidism. We must remember that the effect of the production of too little thyroxin or too much thyroxin depends on whether the condition occurs in children or in adults. Now, as mentioned before, if there is a lack of iodine in the diet, the thyroid gland can become very enlarged and make the neck very swollen. This condition is known as goiter. Hyperthyroidism occurs when there is too much thyroxin being secreted by the thyroid gland. Right, what are some of the symptoms we would expect in such a case? We will find that there will be an increased metabolic rate. There will also be weight loss, an increased heart rate, as well as respiration rate and the person's blood pressure. Another symptom would be an increase in irritability. The person will also have sweaty skin and protruding eyes. When I say protruding eyes, I mean that hyperthyroidism can actually cause the eyes to bulge out of their sockets. Let's take a look at under-secretion. Again, under-secretion of thyroxin is also known as hypothyroidism, and it can cause very low metabolism. In children, it can actually lead to a condition known as cretinism. The child does not grow normally. The child is also mentally disabled and does not reach sexual maturity. In adults, on the other hand, it leads to a condition called mycodema, where the person will experience a decreased metabolic rate or a low metabolism, physically lethargic, right? So the person is always going to be feeling very tired. There will be weight gain as well as thickening of the skin. The person will also appear always cold. Moving on to the adrenal glands. Where is the location of the adrenal glands? Very good. On the top of each of the kidneys. Adrenal glands are very important because they are responsible for the secretion of two hormones, namely adrenaline as well as aldosterone. Let's take a look at their functions. Adrenaline is known as the fight or flight hormone. Why? Because it prepares the body for an emergency. How? Well, during times of excitement or stress, the adrenal medulla of the kidney will secrete adrenaline, which helps the nervous system to prepare the body for an emergency. When this happens, you will find that the adrenaline has certain effects on the body. When adrenaline is released, it will have an effect on the heart, right? Where it will lead to an increase in the heartbeat of the person. It will have an effect on the alimentary canal, causing peristalsis now. The movement of the food down the alimentary canal will slow down. The adrenaline will have an effect on the blood vessel, causing them to constrict. Then the blood pressure will start to increase and more blood will be sent to the person's muscles. Blood flow to the muscles increased because the blood vessels widened. And the muscles therefore received more blood, which brings more oxygen and glucose that the muscles need to get more energy, so that the person can now have a faster muscle response. It will have an effect on the eyes, causing the pupils to dilate, allowing more light now to enter into the person's eye, giving him an improved vision. The release of adrenaline will also have an effect on the liver, causing the liver now to convert more glycogen into glucose, increasing the blood glucose levels, right? So that more glucose is going to be available for cellular respiration, which will release energy. Adrenaline will also have an effect on the lungs, increasing the rate and the depth of a person's breathing. Right? More oxygen will be absorbed into the blood for faster cellular respiration to take place, thereby leading to faster release of energy. So what happened? Children, all those effects of adrenaline prepare the body for what is called the fight or flight response. You are ready to fight the enemy or run away from it. Let's move on to the pancreas. The pancreas is responsible for secreting two hormones, namely insulin and glucagon. Let's find out what their functions are. Now, insulin and glucagon, children, are responsible for controlling the level of glucose in the blood. And if the blood glucose level drops to below the normal level, it will be called hypoglycemia. And if the glucose level rises above the normal level, it will be known as hyperglycemia. We will talk about those two conditions in a few minutes. Now, this insulin and glucagon are made in special groups of cells called the islets of Langerhans. These islets of Langerhans contain two main types of cells, namely the alpha cells and the beta cells. The alpha cells produce glucagon, while the beta cells produce insulin. Let's start with the glucagon. Now, the glucagon, children, is only secreted when you find that the blood glucose level is dropping below the normal. That glucagon will go to the liver and convert that glycogen there that's stored in the liver, right? It will convert that glycogen into glucose, making it available in the blood. And in that way, you'll find that the blood sugar level will increase, bringing it back to normal. When the blood glucose levels are extremely high in the blood, then the pancreas will release insulin. That insulin will decrease the blood glucose level, bringing it back to normal. How does it do that? Well, the insulin will convert the glucose that's prevalent in the blood, changing it into glycogen in the liver. This helps to lower the blood glucose levels, bringing it back to normal. Right, let's take a look at what happens if the insulin is over-secreted and if insulin is under-secreted in the body. Right, now let's remind ourselves, what is the function of that insulin? What is its job? Now, insulin, we know, plays a role in lowering the blood glucose levels. So if there's too much of insulin being secreted, it's going to lead to a condition known as hypoglycemia, where the person will have low blood sugar. The person's movements becomes extremely slow and the arms and legs start feeling extremely weak. His mental function will be reduced and he will become very pale and sweaty. Eventually, he becomes unconscious, and if it continues to drop, the person can actually die. Other symptoms of hypoglycemia includes shaking, a fast heartbeat, impaired vision, anxiousness, dizziness, hunger, headaches, irritability. If insulin is under-secreted, it is known as hyperglycemia. And then this results in a condition known as diabetes mellitus. A person who suffers from this condition is called a diabetic. The symptoms can include excessive thirst, right? The person will end up being very thirsty all the time. Fatigue, meaning he will feel very tired. Frequent urination, okay? Increased appetite, weight loss, nausea, vomiting, as well as blurred vision. Moving on to the gonadal hormones now. There are 3 gonadal hormones that are secreted by the gonads, right? Let's take a look at the roles of these gonadal hormones. Right, so let's begin with the testosterone hormone secreted by the testes. What is the function of these hormones? It plays a very important role, children, in the development of the male sex organs. When does this happen? It happens during puberty. Testosterone is also important or responsible for the male secondary sexual characteristics. Like what? Like the deeper voice that the boy develops, his facial hair, as well as his greater muscle mass. Let's move on to the ovaries. Now, the estrogen is responsible for the female's secondary sexual characteristics. Like what? Like the development of her sex organs, her breasts. The estrogen also plays a role in the development of the female sex organs. When does this happen? It happens during puberty. Another important role played by the estrogen is that it's responsible for the thickening of the endometrium. What is the endometrium? The lining of the uterus and the preparation of the uterus for implantation. It also inhibits the FSH production and stimulates LH production. Now, the progesterone is secreted by the corpus luteum gland, where? In the ovaries. And what is the function of the progesterone? The same as the estrogen, progesterone is also responsible for the thickening of the endometrium, right? As well as the maintenance of the endometrium during pregnancy. Progesterone is also responsible for suppressing the release of the hormones FSH and LH. Hope you enjoyed our video. Like and subscribe.